In an effort to host Denver's first Olympic Games, a committee represented primarily by members of Aspen and Colorado Springs began to organize an Olympic bid in 1954 in an attempt to host the 1960 Winter Games. This deadline was moved and came to a finalized bid that was submitted to the International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, for the 1976 Winter Olympics. In 1972, the bid was accepted. While cities normally consider the Olympic bids a great honor, Denver's citizens were split on the approval ratings. The Olympics cost large sums of taxpayer money, had an everlasting change on the city's infrastructure, and changed Colorado's natural environment. For these reasons, a man by the name of Dick Lamb recognized these issues and ran a campaign going against hosting the Olympics. Overall, his charge led to a 3-2 citizen vote against hosting the Games, making Denver the first city to reject an accepted Olympic bid. Denver's refusal in hosting the 1976 Winter Olympics proved to be a shock to the Olympic community. No previous candidates had ever turned down the Olympics before. This brought forth a myriad of questions about whether it was the city's right or responsibility to host the Olympics if their bid was granted. If the planned hosting city rejects the Games, they would have to be hosted somewhere else on a relatively short notice. The reasoning behind Denver's refusal was the current economic and environmental stati, both being too stressed as they were, and the convincing power of Dick Lamb on the population of Denver that caused the Games to be moved elsewhere. This refusal, however, supposedly doesn't affect Denver's future bids for hosting the Games. While this decision may have helped the city at the time, the Games would have brought lasting infrastructural effects that would have continued to benefit the city and its people to this day. However, Dick Lamb thinks that
the Olympic Committee has a long memory, number one. Number two is that I think as long as our Constitution allows the right of referendum and in other words, people can get things on the ballot. Colorado is still an environmentally oriented state. I think the Olympic Committee would be snake bit, and I think it would be very unlikely in the at least next 10 years that they would give Colorado the Olympics.
Denver wasn't doing very well in an economic standpoint when they bidded for the title of host of the Olympic Winter Games in 1976. It was dire enough, in fact, that it was very easy for Dick Lamb to convince Denver's populace to outvote those who supported the idea by a ratio of about 3-2. Based on what Coloradans had learned about the 1960 Winter Olympics in Squaw Valley and how it had cost California nearly 13 times what they'd originally estimated, some people, including Dick Lamb, still remained convinced that Colorado did the right thing in bailing out. This decision actually helped him win the governorship 2 years later, a post he kept for 12 years.
I was governor because of the Olympics. That is true.
However,
anybody that was there at the time, I was committing political suicide. You don't take on the Olympics, which was, at the time I started opposing it, was very popular. I mean, I'm not much of a politician, but I know that you don't gain political office generally by fighting a very popular institution.
The notion of too much growth had captured the minds of students and members of Colorado as a whole. Indeed, concerns about growth and its negative impact on the environment were clearly made visible in the state's decision not to host the 1976 Olympics in Denver, as Coloradans feared the detrimental impact such an event may pose to the state's environment. Denver had planned to host the Games across an area larger than anyone had ever planned, from Denver to Steamboat Springs. In total, that was over 160 miles in distance. As Dick Lamb researched the Games, he began questioning the benefits. He states that
more questions came out about where they were going to hold the various events. They were going to have, this ski jumping in Steamboat Springs and the downhill in Vail. It was it was a scattered Olympics. The idea of building all of these expensive facilities every 4 years in a different location, I'm really skeptical about that.
In this quote taken from the Colorado Independent, this concern is shown to have been what originally caused the city to turn down the Olympics the first time. Given that environmental concerns in part derailed the Olympics in 1976, you'd think a prominent environmentalist would have been a key appointment on this committee, said Gary Wagner, an environmental activist in Fort Collins. Environmental issues such as air quality, traffic congestion, climate change, forest health, population growth, and water need to be considered in this Olympic bid. Coloradans are passionate about protecting their environment. Any serious look at whether or not to pursue a bid should evaluate environmental impacts and include voices from the conservation community in the conversation. Denver voters turned down the Olympics because of a preliminary guilt of harming the environment from here to Steamboat Springs, and of the false image given of not paying the costs, leading to no Olympic Games having an economic crisis because of costs that were far more than they had originally estimated. Atmospheric brown clouds, or ABCs for short, are caused by large amounts of pollutants such as sulfates, nitrates, and smog that are located in the middle and lower atmosphere that can impact an ecosystem's health, water quality, and botanical life, while also causing acidic precipitation that is as hazardous to people as it is to any other life form. They are formed when normal atmospheric phenomena, like wind or rain, cannot keep up with the pollution being pumped into the atmosphere. Denver has a relatively small one already, and in some eastern cities, the situation is next to dire. The added population and burning of fossil fuels to drive the 160 miles from Denver to Steamboat Springs would only worsen the atmospheric conditions in the cities, and possibly have even greater impacts on the surrounding environments. Heading to the more economic side of the case against the Olympics, several factors ended up contributing to the downvoting of the Olympics hosting. The ballot itself was said to have been confusing, Sidney Boleen stating that no meant yes and yes meant no. That's what killed us. She also puts the Denver committee and its supporters at fault as well for making the situation unclear and not as bad as it should have been, saying that we got very complacent. Nobody really realized that we might lose this whole thing and disgrace ourselves in the eyes of the whole world.
The economics were very powerful, and the more the newspapers investigated it, the more they said, yes, the Olympic Committee is naively got itself into obligations, the magnitude of which they hadn't fully realized.
In many ways, hosting the Olympics is a right that is bought through the bidding and expenditure of funds and time. The Lake Tribune states that the rights to the Olympics are what are being bidded on, in excess of hundreds of thousands of dollars, plus the fact that the bidding cities have to be big enough to host the Olympics before they can even start. As you can see, this is a right that is very exciting to be able to claim. There are lots of reasons why the Olympics can be considered a responsibility as well as a right. Even though there are often dozens of countries that are eager to host the Olympics and take the challenges that come with, someone does have to be willing to go through with it to the end. This includes planning, building, and maintaining the facilities necessary to run the Olympics, not to mention preparing everyone in the city for an influx of people, both on an economic and a personal level. Denver didn't think they were ready to take on that much responsibility, therefore they ceded the games to the next willing candidate. This caused a slight inconvenience for Innsbruck, as they had far less time to prepare than they had before, but it was fortunate they didn't have to build everything in the 1.5 years they did have. Even though there have been some scars left by Denver's refusal in the Olympic community, many sources claim that this will not affect the future bids from Denver. Denver attorney John Frew states, "I don't think that many people will look back and say, gee, it could have been us. I think most people look ahead and say, wow, maybe next time." This, coupled with the fact that TeamUSA.org states that there is no grudge being carried because of the refusal, Denver may very well have another chance at hosting the Olympics. This also shows that there wasn't much regret in turning the Olympics over to someone else, as Denver was said to be in over its head and in too much of a dire situation to succeed in the hosting at the time. While the refusal of Denver's right to host the Olympics was frowned upon at the time, it may have saved the city from taking on too much responsibility at once. The costs of hosting the Olympics, both economic and environmental, would likely have been too much for the struggling city, and it was better off giving those rights to someone else. The benefits of other cities' hosting of the Olympics was varied, from millions of dollars in debt to millions in profit. There wasn't really any way without a prediction of the future to tell what Denver's financial gains or losses would have been, but hopefully next time Denver goes to the gold, so to speak, the city will be ready for the responsibility and ready for the rights of the Olympics.